Every revolution begins long before the first act of defiance, long before banners are raised or bullets fired. Stage 1 is the simmering phase, the quiet pressure building beneath the surface, often invisible to those in power. In historical revolutions, this stage is characterized by widespread discontent, economic strain, and the slow infiltration of revolutionary ideas among the populace. France in the late 18th century, Russia in the early 20th century, and Cuba before 1959 all share this underlying pattern, a society appearing calm on the surface but cracking under the weight of injustice and inequality. In France, the year 1788 seemed outwardly stable, yet deep structural problems haunted the nation. The monarchy, led by Louis XVI, maintained its luxurious court at Versailles while peasants struggled to feed themselves. France was deeply in debt from costly wars, including support for the American Revolution, and the tax system disproportionately burdened the lower classes. Meanwhile, the nobility enjoyed exemptions, further inflaming resentment. This disparity created fertile ground for revolutionary ideas, even though the majority of citizens had not yet organized or openly rebelled. Intellectuals and philosophers, the precursors of revolutionary thought, were already challenging the legitimacy of absolute monarchy, advocating equality, liberty, and rights for the common people. The seeds of revolution were planted not with violence but with ideas. Russia mirrors this pattern centuries later. Before 1917, the Russian Empire under Tsar Nicholas II appeared stable to foreign observers. But internally, it was a pressure cooker. Peasants and workers endured crushing poverty. Industrial labor conditions were harsh, and the middle class had little political influence. Discontent simmered quietly as Marxist and socialist ideologies gained traction, spreading the notion that systemic change was necessary. Events like Russia's disastrous involvement in World War I and repeated economic crises acted as accelerants, but the initial stage was largely about dissatisfaction and awareness, people beginning to see that the system was fundamentally unfair and incapable of meeting their needs. Cuba in the 1950s also fits this model. While Batista's government projected an image of order and economic growth, the reality for much of the population was poverty, inequality, and corruption. Political repression was widespread, and the common people lacked representation or meaningful opportunity. Fidel Castro, along with Che Guevara and other revolutionaries, began to articulate an alternative vision, a Cuba where wealth and power would be redistributed and foreign domination curtailed. Like France and Russia, this was still a period of latent tension. The storm had not yet broken, but the air was charged with the scent of change. Stage 1 is crucial because it highlights the invisible cracks that often go unnoticed until they widen into open rebellion. It is a time when citizens begin questioning authority, discussing injustice, and imagining alternatives. There is no single revolutionary act yet, only the slow accumulation of grievances and the quiet spread of transformative ideas. Social stratification, economic strain, corruption, and the influence of ideology converge to create a volatile environment. This phase is deceptive. To an outsider, the nation may appear orderly, yet beneath the surface, ordinary people are increasingly aware of their collective dissatisfaction. Understanding Stage 1 is essential for analyzing any revolution, including contemporary societies. It is the stage where history quietly records the dissatisfaction of the masses, laying the groundwork for eventual upheaval. Without this stage, revolutions cannot occur. They are not spontaneous explosions, but rather the inevitable eruption of long-suppressed social, political, and economic pressures. France, Russia, and Cuba each demonstrate that before the noise of rebellion, there is the silence of growing discontent, a calm before the storm. Stage 2 of the revolutionary cycle is the ignition point. the moment when simmering discontent transforms into visible, active resistance. In Stage 1, societal pressures quietly accumulated economic hardship, social inequality, corruption, and the spread of radical ideas, but the system still functioned and the masses remained largely passive. Stage 2, however, marks the critical transition from latent unrest to overt action. It is the phase where a single event or series of events acts as a spark, catalyzing widespread participation and mobilizing ordinary people into a revolutionary movement. History demonstrates that revolutions rarely erupt in a vacuum. They require a trigger to turn simmering anger into action. In France, the spark arrived on July 14, 1789, with the storming of the Bastille. This medieval fortress and prison symbolized the arbitrary power of the monarchy. While only a few prisoners were held inside, the Bastille represented oppression and injustice. Its capture by Parisian crowds was both a literal and symbolic act, signaling that the people would no longer passively accept the absolute authority of King Louis XVI. The storming galvanized revolutionary fervor, spreading rapidly across France. The spark did not create the revolution, it revealed the pent-up frustrations of millions who had been suffering under economic strain, food shortages, and a rigid social hierarchy. Russia experienced a similar ignition during the February Revolution of 1917. Bread riots, strikes, and protests escalated in Petrograd, fueled by years of economic hardship, military defeats, and political stagnation. The spark was multifaceted. The immediate crisis of food shortages collided with long-standing resentment toward Tsarist authority. Once the initial protests began, they spread like wildfire as workers, soldiers, and ordinary citizens joined in unprecedented numbers. The abdication of Tsar Nicholas II was the culmination of this spark, an event that transformed private dissatisfaction into collective action and irreversible political change. In Cuba, the spark emerged differently but no less dramatically. Small-scale guerrilla attacks led by Fidel Castro in the Sierra Maestra Mountains evolved into a national uprising against the Batista regime. Batista's corruption, repression, and failure to address social inequities created the conditions for revolt, but it was the visible acts of defiance, armed attacks, propaganda broadcasts, and public speeches that ignited popular support. Ordinary citizens, previously fearful or indifferent, now saw a tangible alternative to the existing order. The spark converted private hope into public action, setting Cuba on the path to revolutionary victory. Stage 2 also involves the emergence of leaders and movements who articulate the grievances of the people. These figures give shape and direction to collective anger, transforming disorganized frustration into organized rebellion. In France, Robespierre and the Jacobins provided ideological clarity and strategic leadership. In Russia, Lenin and the Bolsheviks transformed widespread discontent into a coherent revolutionary agenda. In Cuba, Castro and Guevara created a unifying vision that combined nationalism, socialism, and anti-imperialism. Without leadership and ideology, a spark may ignite briefly but fail to create sustained revolutionary momentum. Another critical element of Stage 2 is the role of communication. In all three historical examples, ideas spread quickly and effectively, creating solidarity among the masses. Pamphlets, speeches, newspapers, and word-of-mouth networks allowed revolutionary ideas to reach far beyond the initial epicenter of unrest. The spark is both literal protests, riots, armed attacks, and symbolic, igniting hope and courage among the population. By the end of Stage 2, the revolution has moved beyond theory and latent dissatisfaction. Ordinary citizens are mobilized, the old authority is visibly challenged, and the country enters a period of heightened tension. The spark transforms society. The previously calm and simmering discontent of Stage 1 erupts into open confrontation. France, Russia, and Cuba each demonstrate that revolutions are not spontaneous explosions. They are carefully primed by stage one, but they require the spark to set the engine of change in motion. Stage two teaches a crucial lesson. Revolutions are triggered, not inevitable. A single moment, a prison stormed, a riot sparked, a small insurgency broadcast can convert simmering anger into a movement capable of shaking the foundations of power. Stage three of the revolutionary cycle is where the latent discontent and initial spark of rebellion evolve into the full dismantling of the existing power structure. By this stage, the frustrations and mobilization of the masses, combined with organized revolutionary leadership, begin to topple entrenched institutions. The collapse of the old order is rarely smooth or immediate. It is marked by chaos, uncertainty, and the power vacuum that creates both opportunity and danger. France, Russia, and Cuba provide stark examples of how entrenched regimes, once challenged by determined revolutionary movements, can crumble under the weight of systemic flaws and popular revolt. In France, the collapse of the monarchy was swift once the storming of the Bastille ignited widespread unrest. The revolutionary fervor that had been building over decades, fueled by economic hardship, social inequality, and philosophical challenges to absolute monarchy, now surged forward with unstoppable force. The king and queen, symbols of an outdated and disconnected aristocracy, were increasingly powerless to control the escalating situation. Key events, such as the Women's March on Versailles, forced Louis XVI to confront the reality that royal authority no longer held the loyalty of the people or even the army. By 1792, the monarchy was abolished and the French First Republic was declared. The collapse of the old order, however, did not bring immediate stability. Instead, it unleashed factionalism, radicalism, and the chaos of competing visions for France's future. In Russia, the collapse of the Tsarist regime followed a similar trajectory. The February Revolution of 1917 began with strikes and demonstrations, but as the unrest spread, it became clear that Tsar Nicholas II no longer commanded legitimacy. The military, essential for maintaining control, began to side with the people rather than the monarchy. Within days, the Tsar abdicated, and the provisional government attempted to take control. Yet the collapse of the old order left a fragile vacuum, creating an environment where Bolshevik leaders like Lenin could capitalize on the chaos and push for more radical systemic changes. Russia's old order did not simply fall. It disintegrated, leaving a society in turmoil, ripe for revolutionary consolidation and eventual authoritarianism under the Bolsheviks. Cuba's experience in the late 1950s demonstrates that the collapse of entrenched regimes often requires both armed struggle and widespread popular support. Fulgencio Batista's regime, despite controlling much of the state apparatus, could not withstand the persistent guerrilla campaigns led by Fidel Castro and Che Guevara, combined with mass protests and the erosion of legitimacy. As Batista fled the country on January 1, 1959, Cuba entered a period of uncertainty and transition. The collapse was both political and psychological. The old symbols of power were gone, but the nation now faced the challenge of constructing a new revolutionary state from the ruins of the old one. Stage 3 is critical because it represents the point of no return. Once the old order collapses, there is no returning to the previous system. Authority is in flux, laws are contested, and competing factions vie for influence. Chaos often accompanies this stage. Economic instability, social disorder, and the threat of counter-revolutionary forces emerge alongside revolutionary optimism. Leadership becomes paramount. Without clear direction, the vacuum can lead to prolonged anarchy or the rise of authoritarian figures who promise stability. The collapse of the old order also marks a psychological shift. The masses, who were once passive observers of injustice, now recognize their collective power. Revolutionary leaders consolidate legitimacy, using both ideology and force to shape the new system. Policies, reforms, and sometimes radical actions are introduced to solidify change and prevent the old order from reasserting itself. Stage 3 demonstrates a universal truth of revolutions. Entrenched power can appear invincible until it is tested. Once the old order begins to crumble, the pace of events accelerates, often unpredictably. France, Russia, and Cuba all experienced the dramatic unraveling of long-standing institutions, leaving societies in the unstable but fertile ground where revolutions could redefine the course of history. The collapse of the old order is both destructive and transformative, setting the stage for the next phase, the consolidation of revolutionary power. Stage 4 in the cycle of revolution represents a crucial and often perilous transformation, the consolidation of revolutionary power. After the old order collapses, societies are left in chaos, and the revolutionary ideals that once united diverse groups now require structure, organization, and enforcement. Stage 4 is the period in which revolutionary leaders centralize authority, codify ideology into governance, and attempt to stabilize society while implementing the changes that initially motivated the revolution. This stage is both the triumph and the test of revolution, as the ideals of liberty, equality, or social justice must now be translated into practical policies under extraordinary pressure. In France, Stage 4 began with the Jacobin rise to power and the Reign of Terror 1793 to 1794. The revolution, having dismantled the monarchy, faced immense internal and external threats, counter-revolutionary uprisings, foreign invasions, and political fragmentation. To maintain control, Robespierre and the Committee of Public Safety centralized authority, implemented strict censorship, and established revolutionary tribunals. Revolutionary ideology became the law of the land, and enforcement was ruthless. At the same time, social reforms were implemented, including measures to control food prices, redistribute wealth, and eliminate feudal privileges. Stage 4 in France illustrates the delicate balance between consolidating power and preserving revolutionary ideals. Without strong centralization, the revolution risked collapse, but the concentration of power also created authoritarian excesses that would later provoke backlash. In Russia, a similar process occurred after the Bolsheviks seized power in the October Revolution of 1917. Lenin's government faced an unstable nation torn apart by civil war, famine, and political opposition. To consolidate power, the Bolsheviks established the Cheka, a secret police force tasked with eliminating counter-revolutionaries, and implemented war communism to control the economy and ensure resources reached the Red Army. Ideology was codified into governance, with Marxist-Leninist principles guiding policy decisions. Stage 4 in Russia illustrates how revolutionary leaders often prioritize survival and control over individual freedoms, arguing that centralized power is necessary to defend the revolution's gains. The consolidation of revolutionary authority can stabilize society temporarily, but often comes at the cost of civil liberties, political pluralism, and tolerance for dissent. Cuba provides a later 20th century example of Stage 4. After Batista fled in 1959, Castro's revolutionary government quickly consolidated power, merging political authority with ideological enforcement. Land reforms, nationalization of industries, and the establishment of a one-party state were implemented to reshape Cuban society according to revolutionary ideals. Surveillance, censorship, and suppression of opposition became tools for maintaining control and preventing counter-revolutionary threats. While these measures stabilized the country under a unified government, they also concentrated power in the hands of a few leaders, demonstrating the inherent tension of Stage 4. Achieving revolutionary goals often necessitates authoritarian measures. Stage 4 is critical because it transforms revolution from chaos into governance. The revolutionary government must address practical realities, rebuilding economies, managing social unrest, and defending the state from internal and external threats. Yet consolidation also poses moral and strategic dilemmas. Excessive repression can alienate the very population the revolution sought to empower, while too little control can allow counter-revolutionary forces to regain influence. History shows that the leaders who navigate Stage 4 successfully often survive and shape the nation's long-term trajectory, while those who fail may see the revolution collapse or descend into civil war. In contemporary terms, Stage 4 can be observed in societies facing deep political polarization, rising populism, or ideological entrenchment. Institutions may become centralized, dissent suppressed, and political authority increasingly contested. The United States, as suggested in the title, may be experiencing aspects of Stage 4, polarized ideologies, challenges to institutional norms, and tensions between differing visions of governance. While the outcome is not predetermined, understanding Stage 4 provides insight into the pressures societies face when revolutionary or transformative movements consolidate power. Stage 4 teaches a crucial lesson. Revolutions are not complete. Once the old order falls, they must endure the crucible of governance. The consolidation of power is both the moment of revolutionary triumph and the point at which its ideals are most at risk of distortion. France, Russia, and Cuba each illustrate the complex interplay between authority, ideology, and societal stability, demonstrating that this stage defines whether a revolution becomes a lasting transformation or descends into authoritarianism. Stage 5 in the revolutionary cycle is a period of reaction, adjustment, and, in some cases, partial restoration. After the upheaval of Stage 3 and the consolidation of power in Stage 4, societies often experience fatigue with extreme policies, authoritarian measures, or radical reforms. The revolutionary ideal, which initially united the population, now faces practical limitations and growing public discontent. Stage 5 represents the counter-revolutionary or corrective phase, where societies attempt to recalibrate, moderate excesses, and stabilize governance without entirely abandoning the gains of the revolution. This stage illustrates the cyclical nature of revolutionary history, showing that no upheaval, no matter how thorough, is immune to correction. In France, Stage 5 is exemplified by the Thermidorian reaction following the Reign of Terror, 1794. After years of radical rule under Robespierre and the Committee of Public Safety, French society had endured extreme violence, mass executions, and intense social upheaval. Public fatigue, fear, and backlash against authoritarian enforcement created an opportunity for moderates to regain influence. The Thermidorian reaction dismantled the radical Jacobin apparatus, released many political prisoners, and sought to stabilize the economy and governance. Revolutionary ideals such as equality and liberty were retained, but the extreme measures of Stage 4 were curtailed. Stage 5 in France demonstrates that even revolutions must temper their radicalism to survive in the long term, balancing ideals with practical governance. Russia experienced a different, yet parallel, form of corrective action after the initial consolidation of Bolshevik power. Following the chaos of civil war and the harsh policies of war communism, the population suffered famine, economic collapse, and social unrest. In response, Lenin introduced the new economic policy, NEP, in 1921, allowing limited private enterprise, small-scale capitalism, and market mechanisms to revive the economy. NEP represented a pragmatic correction. The revolutionary government maintained its authority and ideological goals, but adjusted its policies to stabilize society and prevent mass disillusionment. Stage 5 in Russia shows how revolutionary regimes often must compromise temporarily to preserve long-term power and avoid collapse under the weight of their own radical measures. Cuba, while more enduringly centralized, also experienced subtle corrective shifts after Castro's initial consolidation. Economic difficulties, the need for foreign trade, and the recognition of internal inefficiencies required policy adjustments, such as agricultural reforms, foreign aid negotiations, and limited industrial modifications. While Cuba did not experience a major counter-revolution, small adjustments and pragmatic governance were necessary to sustain the revolution over decades. Stage 5 highlights that even highly centralized systems cannot maintain absolute rigidity without eventually risking instability or popular discontent. The essence of Stage 5 is the societal recalibration following revolutionary excesses. People grow weary of repression, ideological rigidity, or economic hardship. Leaders must respond to maintain legitimacy. This stage may manifest as policy moderation, institutional reforms, or leadership changes. Counter-revolutions may also occur more violently, as seen in France, where radical leaders were overthrown, or through social and economic adjustments, as in Russia and Cuba. The corrective phase serves as a reminder that revolutions are dynamic and ongoing processes, not static achievements. In modern contexts, Stage 5 can be observed when populations react against polarization, authoritarian tendencies, or over-centralization. Societies may seek compromise, restore civil liberties, or implement reforms to correct imbalances introduced during periods of intense ideological or political consolidation. It represents a critical juncture where the long-term survival of revolutionary gains depends on adaptability and responsiveness to societal needs. Stage 5 demonstrates that revolutions are not linear progressions from oppression to idealized society. They are cyclical, with periods of adjustment necessary to prevent collapse. France, Russia, and Cuba show that after the initial triumphs of revolutionary consolidation, societies must confront the consequences of radical policies and authoritarian governance. Whether through moderation, policy correction, or counter-revolutionary action, Stage 5 ensures that revolutions evolve in response to both internal and external pressures, shaping the nation's trajectory for generations. Stage 6 in the revolutionary cycle represents the long-term outcome of a revolution, either societal renewal, where the ideals of the revolution are institutionalized and society prospers, or decay, where the system collapses, stagnates, or drifts into authoritarianism. After the turbulence of the collapse of the old order, the consolidation of power, and the corrective adjustments of Stage 5, societies reach a critical juncture. Stage 6 is the reflection of whether the revolutionary energy produces sustainable change or ultimately fails to fulfill its original promises. History demonstrates that the ultimate fate of a revolution is determined not only by ideology or initial success, but by the ability of the society and its leaders to adapt, reform, and institutionalize stability. France exemplifies the path of renewal after revolution. Following the Thermidorian reaction and the eventual rise of Napoleon Bonaparte, France transitioned from chaotic revolutionary rule to a more structured political system. While Napoleon imposed authoritarian control, he also codified many revolutionary principles into law, including the Napoleonic Code, which preserved ideals such as equality before the law and secular governance. Over time, France evolved into a republic that integrated many revolutionary ideals into its political and social framework. Stage 6 in France illustrates how a society can transform revolutionary upheaval into enduring institutions, blending stability with reform. Even though compromises and authoritarian measures were necessary in the short term, the long-term effect was societal renewal, where the principles that ignited the revolution were preserved in new political and legal structures. Russia, in contrast, demonstrates a more complex form of Stage 6, marked by both consolidation and decay. After the Civil War, the Bolsheviks established the Soviet Union, centralizing power under a single party and pursuing industrialization, collectivization, and ideological control. While the revolution succeeded in fundamentally transforming Russian society, the lack of political plurality, harsh repression, and economic inefficiencies over decades created stagnation, social unrest, and eventual systemic collapse by 1991. Russia's Stage 6 shows that revolutionary gains can endure institutionally but may simultaneously harbor vulnerabilities. Without flexibility, accountability, and adaptability, a revolutionary system can decay even after decades of apparent stability. Cuba presents a different variation of Stage 6. Fidel Castro's revolution endured for decades, maintaining centralized authority and implementing socialist policies that significantly changed Cuban society. The government consolidated education, healthcare, and social welfare systems, achieving remarkable societal improvements. However, the lack of political pluralism, economic challenges, and reliance on external support created long-term vulnerabilities. Cuba's Stage 6 exemplifies the tension between renewal and decay. Revolutionary ideals were preserved in social structures, but rigidity and external dependence limited economic growth and political evolution. Stage 6 also highlights the cyclical nature of revolutions. Even after consolidation and partial renewal, underlying social, economic, or political pressures may re-emerge, planting the seeds for future upheaval. In France, continued political instability led to subsequent revolutions in the 19th century. In Russia, the collapse of the Soviet Union reflected unresolved tensions from the revolutionary era. And in Cuba, ongoing economic crises continue to challenge the sustainability of the revolutionary system. No revolution is entirely final. The outcomes of Stage 6 influence future cycles, shaping societies for generations. For contemporary societies like the United States, Stage 6 serves as both a cautionary tale and a lens for analysis. If ideological polarization, institutional stress, and societal divisions persist, the country may face either renewal through adaptation and reform or decay through entrenched dysfunction. Stage 6 underscores that revolutions or major societal transformations are ultimately judged not by the initial overthrow of old systems, but by the long-term sustainability of their outcomes. Stage 6 teaches a profound lesson. The success of a revolution is not measured solely by its immediate victories, but by its ability to institutionalize principles, maintain adaptability, and foster societal resilience. Renewal ensures that revolutionary ideals endure and evolve, while decay signals the failure to translate upheaval into lasting progress. France, Russia, and Cuba collectively illustrate the divergent possibilities of this final stage, showing that history's ultimate judgment depends on both leadership and societal adaptability, as well as the continuous negotiation between ideology and reality.